everyone, it's Michelle Caruana from Play Cafe Academy, and I actually had another video all ready to go today about operating a profitable cafe, but I wanted to release that one a little bit later because the CDC on Monday actually released some guidelines about businesses reopening safely, and those businesses included childcare centers, camps, and schools. So I kind of wanted to go through them with you and give you my take on them and explain what I think needs to happen in order for these types of businesses and facilities, especially camps and indoor playgrounds, to open safely and make sure that we're keeping our customers, our employees, and our own family safety at the top of our minds and at the utmost priority. So they released these on Monday, and basically it's talking about what the new normal is going to look like. And it's honestly a little bit scary, especially the regulations that are going to be in place when schools do decide to reopen. So we're in New York, we've already closed schools for the remainder of the school year, but I know in some states, I know Colorado, some other states are starting to reopen schools and childcare centers for non-essential workers. And I'm not really going to go too much into the schools regulations because I want to talk more about this from the business side, so indoor playgrounds, camps, dance studios, things like that. But I was really kind of shocked that they are going to be practicing, or they're going to try to practice social distancing in schools. All staff and teachers and all adults are going to be forced to wear masks, which, you know, I have mixed feelings on. I know it's a safety precaution and I know it's very important, but I also don't really know if I want my children going to school wearing a mask. I know for a fact that my 3-year-old who has special needs is not going to keep a mask on. Neither is he going to be able to understand or really grasp social distancing. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. I'm really grappling with the decision about whether or not I should even ever send him back to school, you know, within the next year, 2 years, 3 years, because it's just, I really am concerned about the emotional impact that all of these, you know, new normals are going to have on our kids. And I'm not going to get too far into it. That can be another video for another day, but I'm going to post a link to all of these guidelines in the description of this video if you want to check them out yourselves, and comment, let me know your thoughts. But before I really get into this, I just want to quickly remind you to please subscribe to my channel if you find this video helpful, and turn the post notifications on using the little bell so that you never miss a video. I'm still putting out a video every single week, sometimes multiple per week. All right, so I'm gonna go through the camps regulations because that most closely resembles the indoor playground model. I know that childcare centers are definitely different because the children are there for a longer period of time. The adults typically, the parents don't technically need to go into the facility, whereas with an indoor playground, they will. So I know a lot of daycares are doing like curbside pickup and drop off, so the adults aren't actually going into the facility. Indoor playgrounds can't really do that. So I'm going to go ahead and read the camp regulations. And it's kind of like almost like a path. So have you ever taken one of those quizzes like in Cosmopolitan where it's like, are you this? Yes or no? Okay, then go here. And then are you this? Yes or no? And then go here. And then you kind of arrive at a certain outcome. That's kind of what this looks like. So you're gonna need to see it for yourself, but I'll pop an image on the screen too. But so this is the first checklist about whether a business should consider opening or not. So it says, should you consider reopening? And then the first thing that you have to pass says, will reopening be consistent with applicable state and local orders? So this is where it's going to start to differ by state. So in New York State, we're required to wear masks in public right now. So, you know, operating an indoor playground in New York State or a camp or anything like that is going to be very difficult until that mandate is lifted. So I know, again, for a fact that my kids are not, my 5-year-old might, but my 3-year-old definitely would not be able to abide by the mask rule. So it would be really hard for me to reopen because we do serve young babies, toddlers, and preschoolers who probably have the same feelings about a mask and have the same struggles with keeping the mask on and things like that. So in some states where there is not a mask mandate, it might be a little bit easier to get past this one. But for me in New York State, until that mask mandate is lifted, I really can't even get past this first checklist item because we're not going to be able to feasibly abide by that. So that's going to differ a little bit depending on what's going on in your state. All right, so the next one says, are you ready to protect children and employees at higher risk for severe illness? So when I was reading more about this, it was people with liver disease, people with lung conditions, asthma, things like that. So Something that you can consider doing is asking people health-related questions, advising those who do suffer from those health conditions or chronic illnesses that make them more susceptible to COVID-19. Maybe ask them to hold off on visiting for their own protection, and ask your staff if they or anyone in their families is affected by these chronic illnesses, because that could also be a danger. So in schools, I know they're just taking special precautions with these individuals, but because you are a recreational facility, you could just advise people who are affected by this to maybe hold off on visiting. But again, that's going to be a deeply personal decision for your business. And then the third checklist item says, are you able to screen children and employees upon arrival for symptoms and history of exposure? So for us, we are going to be checking temperatures using an infrared touchless thermometer. I've gotten some feedback from indoor playground owners who have already reopened. So shout out to Heather in Florida. She owns Jumpin' Jacks over in Florida. And she mentioned that children were actually getting pretty scared of the thermometer, and she was finding it really difficult to mandate this. She was still doing it, but it was very difficult. And she was a little bit concerned that it was giving children bad memories of her place. So I completely feel for her. I think that is completely valid. So as you're putting your reopening plans together, or if you're planning to open your first business, definitely consider, if you're, logistically, yes, you can take temperatures upon arrival, but it is going to be difficult, especially with babies and toddlers and preschoolers, maybe not wanting to have their temperature taken, or maybe having some parents protest this. Now, I did send a survey out to my customer base, and they actually were very receptive to when I asked them if they were comfortable having their temperature taken upon arrival. The only concern that I did hear a little bit was that people were concerned about birthday parties. So if they hosted a birthday party, they were concerned about having their guests tested for symptoms or temperature or anything like that upon arrival, because they were a little bit afraid that their guests would be turned away and they would be embarrassed and things like that. So there is a little bit of concern. I would just ask your customer base, ask around, ask for better solutions. And I know that, screening with a thermometer isn't necessarily going to catch any people who are asymptomatic or people who are a carrier, but again, haven't shown symptoms yet. So it's not a perfect system. It's going to reduce risk of exposure, but certainly not eliminate it. But if you got through these checklist items, so it says if you answered no to any of them, then you cannot reopen. And they're going to want to see a plan if you do decide to reopen. The CDC, your local health department, whoever is kind of mandating that in your area. It's really unclear in our area, I have to be completely honest. But if you were able to say yes, we are able to meet all of these three criteria, then you can move on to the next set of criteria. So we're moving on now. So it says, are recommended health and safety actions in place? Number 1, promote healthy hygiene practices such as hand washing, employees wearing a face cloth covering as feasible. For us, we are adding we're recommending that people add a hand washing sink, even if it's just a portable one, to the front entrances, so that everybody has to wash their hands, following the recommended time length, the recommended type of soap before they ever enter the facility. And it's going to be pretty easy for our employees to wear masks. We might have them wear like decorated ones so the kids aren't really scared or anything like that. But this one is pretty easy to abide by. And we are adding extra hand sanitizing stations and things like that. We're also changing our POS system a little bit to be more touchless. And we're going to require that people register online before they come, so that they're actually not really doing a transaction at all. And they can even add coffee, they can add snacks, they can do all of that stuff ahead of time without having to actually exchange any payment. All right, so number 2, intensify cleaning, disinfection, and ventilation of facilities and transport vehicles and buses. So for us, we're definitely going to be, keeping up with what the CDC is recommending in terms of cleaning. We're going to be stepping that up. We're going to be getting some new equipment. We're going to be considering things like MicroShield, which is a fog that is not only disinfects past germs, but it actually actively fights bacteria from forming on your surfaces. So that's something that I'm going to recommend that people look into, but that's also a pretty easy one to kind of get past. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. So this one says, encourage social distancing through increased spacing, small groups, and limited mixing between groups and staggered scheduling, arrival, and drop off if feasible. So we can definitely stagger arrival and drop off. That's not a problem, so that people aren't going to be waiting in line really close next to each other. But social distancing is going to be very difficult for, you know, the 10 and under age group. It's especially in a play area where, you know, social interaction is encouraged. So I already made a video on this a couple weeks ago. It's called the Practical Local Business Guide to Reopening After Coronavirus. And I am emphasizing working with a little bit older kids. So if we do decide to offer summer camps, it's going to be for the older kids age range, because they are able to socially distance a little bit more. And we're going to be working on more structured classes, structured events. So like parent participating events. So like music classes where we can, you know, spread out in a circle a little bit further away from each other. We're going to be kicking up all of our virtual classes and events. So if people still don't feel comfortable coming into our facility, we are going to be offering online options. But there is, you know, a lot of ways to get around this. And it does say encourage social distancing. So it doesn't say that it's mandatory, but obviously we want to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. So those are the kinds of things that I'm going to be recommending in the future. But if you want my full take on that, the social distancing aspect, then go back and watch that video. I will link to it in the description of this video. All right, so the next one is also kind of tricky, especially for indoor playgrounds. It says, where feasible, adjust activities and procedures to limit sharing of items such as toys, belongings, supplies, and equipment. So I already talked in that previous video that I mentioned about switching out a lot of our smaller toys for bigger, more climbing types of toys, just because it's less likely that they'll go in somebody's mouth. Those bigger toys are easier to clean. You know, we can just wipe them down all day. We don't have to like pick up all the individual toys and wash them. So I am expecting a lot of businesses to move more towards those bigger structures that are easier to clean as opposed to those smaller toys immediately. And especially, I talked about ball pits in another video. I think they're a thing of the past. I think a lot of things, especially those smaller toys where, you know, germs are very easy to get on them and they're very hard to clean. I think a lot of those things are things of the past. So if, you know, I'm recommending to all of my Playmaker Society groups that they consider switching out some of those smaller baby toys for some of those bigger pieces. And I'm giving them recommendations on my favorite brands, my favorite products, things like that. All right, so the last one on this list says, train all employees on health and safety protocols. That's pretty easy. The CDC is actually providing a lot of resources. I've been, you know, decently impressed with the material that they're giving. It's very confusing trying to determine where indoor playgrounds are falling, but you know, it's pretty easy to make sure that all employees are updated. So now if you were able to get through all of those items, then it says that you can open. But if any of them you answered no to, then you have to meet safeguards first. So in my opinion, the biggest thing to get around is going to be the social distancing thing. So those structured classes, focusing more on retail, focusing more on virtual things. It is going to be a very big deal for our businesses to focus on in the coming weeks. And then now we're moving on to the last one. So this one is called, is ongoing monitoring in place? And this is another tricky one. So if you answered all of those previous ones last, yes. If you answered all of the previous list, yes. Now we're moving on to the last pillar, the last list of requirements. So it says, okay, is ongoing monitoring in place? Number one, develop and implement procedures to check for signs and symptoms in children and employees daily upon arrival as feasible. So again, as feasible. So there is ways to get around it. For example, if a child is afraid to have their temperature taken and things like that, but we already talked about screening. We can have them fill out a survey or something, making sure, like for example, we are having people pay online in advance, as I mentioned, and we're also having them sign our waiver. So we could also, you know, put a checkbox that says, you know, to my knowledge, I have not been exposed to anybody with COVID-19, et cetera, et cetera. So this is something that we could definitely do. And then the next one says, if feasible, implement enhanced screening for children and employees who have recently been present in areas of high transmission, including temperature checks and symptom monitoring. So again, that's something that we're just going to have to tackle as it comes. We might have to ask people if they have been in an area with a lot of cases. Again, it doesn't really provide any guidance in terms of what is a area of high transmission. You know, that's pretty subjective. It could mean a lot of different things. People can interpret it differently. So I would be looking for a little bit more guidance on that one. But anyways, the next one says, encourage anyone who is sick to stay home, which we already do, and in our policies. The next one is plan for if children or employees get sick. So this is going to be, again, really tricky with a highly transmittable disease like COVID-19. If somebody calls you and says, hey, I was infected and I was at your facility, a week ago, you're going to have a plan in place to be able to contact every single person that could have been exposed by them that day, maybe the next day. So again, we're going to be tackling this by having people register and pay online in advance. And we're going to make sure that we have all of the contact information, and that might make people even more receptive to giving you their information, like their email address, their phone number. Sometimes people are a little hesitant to hand over that information, but when it comes to this sort of matter, I found that they're a little bit more receptive to that. So if you are taking payments on the spot, you need to make sure that you are going to be able to contact them in the event that somebody gets infected. And then of course, if one of your employees gets sick or if you get sick, you need to make sure that you have backups, because if somebody even might be showing symptoms, it's really not responsible as a business owner to have them coming into work, because again, we know that people can be asymptomatic for a long time, and this is not a foolproof method, but somebody showing symptoms, they have to stay home, and you as a business owner have to take on the responsibility to make sure that you have enough backups in place in the event that this does need to happen. I know firsthand how hard it is to have an employee call in sick and really not have a lot of options. So if I was a business owner getting ready to reopen, that is definitely something that I would be working on. I would be beefing up my training so that if I do need to have a brand new employee step in, that they could be trained, very, very, very quickly. So we use a lot of video training, we use a lot of audio training. So if I was a business owner that was closed right now, I would definitely be in my facility working on that so that somebody can step into really any role in your business, including yours, without really, stumbling on anything that isn't explained in the documentation. So please put a plan in place for that. All right, only 3 more left. All right, next one is regularly communicate and monitor developments with local authorities, employees, and families regarding cases, exposures, and updates to policies and procedures. So we have an email list. We have a way to email every single person that's been to our facility. If we have updates, if we have somebody that's been infected, we can let people know, like, hey, we want you to contact us if you've been infected or if you've tested positive and you were in our facility. So, we have a 2-way email communication system where we're able to do that. So that one's easy for us to get through. But if you do not have an email service provider, and if you're not, taking this customer information at your point of sale, then you're going to want to probably invest in something. So if your point of sale system can't do it, MailChimp is absolutely free. You can, encourage people to sign up there. If not require it, I really think you should require it. But again, these are really just recommendations. So, all right. The next one is, I lost my place for a second. Sorry, guys. All right, so the next one says, monitor child and employee absences and have a pool of trained substitutes and flexible leave policies and practices. We already talked about this one. It's kind of repetitive. But yeah. All right, and then the last one says, be ready to consult with the local health authorities if there are any cases in the facility or an increase in cases in the local area. So basically, if somebody tests positive, you have to complain about it. You have to contact your customers. You have to contact the local health authorities, and you have to be really in tune with what's happening in your area. And, we would be in phase 4 of reopening for New York State. So right now, my area is in phase 1 of reopening. So luckily, our Governor Cuomo, decided to separate New York City from, upstate and Western New York. So my area, the Rochester area, started phase 1 of opening today. I know a lot of, downstate is not reopening yet. I know a lot of other states are not opening yet, but we actually today started entering phase 1 of reopening. So indoor playgrounds and camps and things like that wouldn't be able to start opening again until stage 4. So what they mean by this, and I had to look for additional clarification because again, it's not super clear, but basically if if the cases begin to rise and the hospitals start to get overwhelmed, then states are going to start reverting back to stages. So if we enter stage 4 and we're able to reopen, and then all of a sudden we revert back to stage 3, we as business owners are responsible for keeping up with that and making sure that we know what's going on, we know what phase we're in, we know if we're able to operate or not. And if the CDC comes out with new recommendations, we have to make sure that we are keeping up with those and making sure that our facility is abiding by all of those mandates. So I would love to know your thoughts on these. Again, it's not requiring masks necessarily. It's not requiring social distancing, which I thought was kind of strange. I thought it was going to be a little bit more specific. It doesn't say really anything about the number of people that can be in your facility. I know that a lot of that is controlled at the state level. So definitely keep in touch with your local health authorities and check out what kind of mandates your area has. But they're just not regulating that on a national level, nor should they. You know, not all states have been hit the same. But yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on these. I'd love to know what your thoughts are about the school year coming up. I would love to know your thoughts on, you know, visiting indoor playgrounds in the future, what you want to look for in terms of what policies they're changing, what things they're abiding by. You know, things like that. So I'd love to know. So leave me a comment, and then I will be back next week with a new video. Have a great week, guys.